The desert dusk burned orange against the horizon, casting long shadows over the dry brush and jagged rocks. The air was sharp with the scent of dust and blood. On a narrow ridge above the valley, Silas Garrett reined in his tired horse ears, pricked to the distant cries below. He had been tracking rumors of raiders for 3 days, moving deeper into Apache territory with each mile. The whispers in the last trading popo spoke of men who left their victims as messages bound and abandoned for the scavengers. Silas had dismissed it as frontier talk, the kind of stories men told to feel brave around a fire. But nothing prepared him for the sight waiting in the gulch. Bound to a weathered post, a young Apache girl knelt in the dirt, her dress torn, her dark hair whipping in the wind. Around her, a half-circle of coyotes prowled, drawn by the weakness in her movements, their eyes glowing with hunger as they closed in. She lifted her chin defiantly, refusing to scream even as her body trembled. Silas's hand tightened on the rifle. He had seen cruelty before, men leaving women as bait for the scavengers of the plains. But this was worse. Deliberate humiliation. A death meant to be slow and public. His jaw clenched. He fired once, the shot echoing across the canyon. The lead coyote fell with the rest scattering back into the scrub with startled yelps. The girl gasped but did not cry out. Silas spurred his horse down the rocky slope, dust exploding under its hooves. He dismounted in a single motion, knife flashing, as he cut through the rope that bit into her wrists. She sagged forward, too weak to stand, her breath hitching against his chest. "You're safe now," he muttered, though his voice was rough, almost uncertain. She tilted her head toward him, eyes wide, a glimmer of both disbelief and suspicion in their depths. Behind them, the coyotes regrouped, circling again, their howls rising like a warning. Silas lifted the girl onto his saddle, swung up behind her, and turned his horse toward the open desert. As they rode, he leaned close, words low against her ear. "You're sleeping with me now." The sentence hung between them, neither tender nor cruel, but heavy with meaning. Was it a promise of perdition or the beginning of a bond? She could not yet refuse. The girl's silence carried its own weight, and Silas knew this night had bound them in ways neither of them had chosen. Silas tightened his grip on the reins as the horse pounded across the barren flats, dust rising in thick clouds that stung his eyes. The girl sat rigid in front of him, her hands still raw and trembling from the ropes, but she did not lean into him for balance. Instead, she kept her spine straight, as if refusing even now to surrender a piece of herself. "Hold on," he muttered, shifting the reins to one hand and steadying her with the other. She gave no reply. He could feel the heat of her skin beneath the torn buckskin dress, but there was no weight of trust in her posture, only resistance, quiet and unyielding. The sun had already dipped low, the desert cooling fast. Silas knew they couldn't ride much longer. The girl's strength was nearly gone, and his horse limped faintly from the hard descent. He spotted a cluster of mesquite trees near a dry creek bed and turned the animal toward the cover. They dismounted in silence. Silas eased her down gently, but her knees buckled and she dropped to the dirt. She caught herself with one hand, the other clutching her side where the rope had cut deep. Silas crouched beside her, pulling a small canteen from his belt. "Drink," he said, holding it out. She hesitated, eyes fixed on him with guarded suspicion. Then slowly she took it, her lips brushing the rim. She drank only a little before thrusting it back. "You need more than that," he insisted. Her voice came low, rough with thirst, yet steady. "I take only what I must." The words surprised him. Most in her place would have drained the canteen dry, but she spoke with the discipline of someone who had been taught to endure, to ration every breath, every drop. Silas studied her face, sunburnt, streaked with dirt, but strong. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. The wind hissed through the mesquite branches overhead, and in the distance the coyotes howled again. Finally she said, "Kiona." He nodded. "I'm Silas Garrett. Folks call me Silas." Kiona's gaze drifted toward the horizon where shadows stretched long and the last light bled out of the sky. She seemed to weigh his name, to decide whether it meant anything worth remembering. Silas busied himself with gathering tinder. His hands moved automatically, the motions worn into him by years of lonely nights on the trail. He struck a spark, coaxing a flame until it grew into a modest fire. The warmth pushed back the desert chill flickering across Kiona's face as she sat with her arms folded tight around her knees. He tore a strip from his saddlebag cloth and reached for her wrists. She flinched, pulling back. "I just want to clean the cuts," he said. His voice softened, almost apologetic. You'll scar bad if you don't. Kiona stared at him for a moment, then slowly extended her hands. The rope burns were angry and raw skin broken in places. Silas dabbed them gently with water, careful not to press too hard. She winced once but made no sound. You've got grit, he murmured. Most would be screaming. Her lips pressed into a line. Screaming feeds the wolves. The simplicity of the answer chilled him more than the night air. He wrapped the cloth around her wrist, tying it snug. His fingers brushed her skin only once, but it was enough to notice how cold she had become. They sat by the fire, the silence thick between them. Silas wanted to ask who had tied her to that post, who had left her as prey, but he bit the questions back. The desert was still awake, and questions could wait. The horse shifted nervously, ears flicking. Silas's eyes snapped up beyond the firelight. The darkness moved low shapes weaving in and out of the brush. Coyotes again, their patience unbroken. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the fire. Silas reached for his rifle, sliding it across his knees. Stay close to the fire, he told her. Kiona did not move, only watched the shadows with that same unflinching stillness she'd held at the post. The coyotes crept nearer, drawn by the smell of smoke and blood. Silas cocked the rifle, the click echoing like thunder in the stillness. He leveled it toward the brush, ready to fire. But before he could squeeze the trigger, a new sound split the air. Low, heavy, deliberate. Not the thin yelps of coyotes. This was deeper, a growl that rolled like thunder out of the darkness. Silas froze, the hair on his neck rising. The coyotes scattered, melting back into the scrub, but the growl remained closer, now steady. Kiona's eyes flashed in the firelight. She turned toward the sound, her voice calm but certain. That is no coyote. Silas tightened his grip on the rifle, scanning the darkness. His gut twisted as he realized she was right. Something larger was out there, circling just beyond the reach of the flames. And then from the shadows, a pair of golden eyes locked on them or went in unblinking, and far too high off the ground to belong to any coyote. The fire crackled, spitting sparks into the night air. Silas kept his rifle steady, eyes fixed on the glowing orbs just beyond the flames. The creature didn't move at first, only watched its chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. Then with a heavy step, it emerged from the shadows. A massive mountain lion padded into view, muscles rippling beneath its tawny coat. It moved silently despite its size, tail swaying low, head angled toward the two humans by the fire. Silas had hunted before, but never had he seen one so bold, so willing to approach firelight. Kiona didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something Silas couldn't hear. He is hungry, she said softly, but he is not yet certain. Silas shot her a quick glance. Hungry or not, he comes closer, I'll put him down. She shook her head once. If you kill him, more will come. The smell of blood calls farther than fire. Her calm unnerved him. She sat cross-legged, hands resting lightly on her knees as though the predator across the flames were no more than a passing wind. Silas tightened his grip on the rifle anyway. The lion circled, keeping just outside the reach of the firelight. Its golden eyes never left them. Each time Silas thought it might retreat, it edged a little closer, its paws silent on the sand. The horse stamped nervously, snorting, pulling against the reins tied to a low branch. Stay still, Silas whispered, though his own voice trembled with tension. Kiona rose slowly, every movement deliberate, her gaze fixed on the lion. Silas's gut twisted. What the hell are you doing? She didn't answer. She took a single step forward, placing herself between the fire and the beast. Her shoulders were square, her posture steady, her breath even. Silas nearly cursed aloud, raising the rifle, but her voice stopped him. Do not fire yet. The mountain lion paused, tail twitching its ears, flicked forward, curious. Kiona knelt, scooping a handful of sand, and let it slip slowly through her fingers. Her lips moved, whispering words Silas didn't understand. It wasn't prayer, not exactly. It was rhythm, like speaking to the earth itself. The lion's muscles bunched. Silas held his breath, finger tight on the trigger. Then with a sudden growl, the cat leapt sideways, vanishing into the scrub as quickly as it had come. Silence swallowed the clearing, broken only by the horse's ragged snorts and Silas's pounding heartbeat. He lowered the rifle, staring at her. What in God's name was that? Kiona turned back toward him, her face calm but her hands trembling faintly at her sides. He chose another path tonight, she said. Silas couldn't decide if it was luck, madness, or something deeper. He wanted to press her, to demand an explanation, but the exhaustion in her posture stopped him. She sank back down by the fire, pulling the blanket he'd left across her shoulders, and said nothing more. For a long while, neither spoke. The fire burned low, crackling, softly casting faint shadows on the dry creek bed. Silas watched her, the way her eyes reflected the flames, the way she sat unbowed despite everything she'd endured. He'd seen men twice her size crumble after less. Finally, he broke the silence. "You didn't scream when the coyotes came. You didn't scream when that cat near took us both?" "Why?" Kiona's gaze flicked to him, sharp and steady. "Noise brings death. Silence keeps you alive." Her words lodged in his chest heavier than he expected. He'd lived by instinct, by gun and grit. But he'd never thought of silence as a weapon. He leaned back, stretching his legs toward the dying fire. "You're a strange one, Kiona. Stronger than most men I've known." She didn't smile. She only looked at the horizon where the stars pressed thick against the desert sky. "Strength is not choice. It is what is left when choice is taken." Silas felt the truth in her tone. He thought of the rope burns on her wrists, of the defiance in her posture, even when tied to that post. She hadn't survived because she was lucky. She'd survived because she refused to yield. The fire dwindled to embers. Silas tossed on another branch, coaxing fresh flames. He pulled his coat tighter, leaning against the saddle. "Get some rest. We ride at dawn." Kiona lay down near the fire, pulling the blanket close. She didn't face him, but her breathing grew steady, slow. Silas sat awake a while longer, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness for movement. When at last sleep crept in, it was restless, haunted by golden eyes and whispered words he couldn't understand. He woke at first light to the sound of movement, soft, deliberate. Kiona was already up, crouched at the creek bed, her hands tracing the sand, eyes sharp and alert. Silas rubbed the sleep from his eyes and reached for his rifle. "What are you doing?" he asked. She didn't turn. "They were here." "Who?" Her hand brushed the imprint of a boot half buried in the sand. She looked back at him, her voice low but steady. "Men, not animals. They came in the night." Silas's stomach dropped. He scanned the horizon, but the desert stretched empty and endless. Whoever they were close. And worse, if they had seen the fire, they knew exactly where to find them. The morning light spread pale and cold across the desert, painting the land in shades of ash and gold. Silas crouched beside Kiona, studying the tracks she'd uncovered in the creek bed. The prints were deep, the edges still sharp. Whoever had left them had passed only hours before, maybe even while they slept. He ran a calloused thumb over the mark. 3 men, maybe 4. Heavy boots, not drifters. They walk with purpose. Kiona nodded. "Raiders." Her tone was certain, not a guess. Silas glanced up at her, catching the quiet steel in her gaze. She knew these men, or at least their kind. The same men he realized who might have tied her to that post, left her as prey. He rose, dusting his hands on his trousers. "If they're trailing us, we can't linger. Pack your things." Kiona gave him a look, sharp, cutting, but bent to gather the blanket anyway. She moved quickly, efficient, despite the rawness of her wrists and the stiffness in her limbs. Silas saddled the horse, his jaw tight. He hated the idea of leaving signs of their camp so fresh. The men would know they weren't far. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, they were already riding hard, the horse's hooves drumming a steady rhythm against the sand. Silas kept his eyes sweeping the ridges, every shadow a possible ambush. Kiona sat behind him, silent, one hand gripping the back of his coat for balance. Hours passed with only the whistle of the wind in their ears. But then, just past midday, Silas spotted movement on a far ridge, a flash of sunlight on metal. He pulled the reins sharply, guiding the horse into a shallow ravine. "They've found us," he muttered. Kiona leaned forward, her breath warm against his ear. "You should have let me walk. You're slower with me here." Silas barked a dry laugh. "And leave you to them? Not a chance." She was silent for a moment, then quietly, "You don't know what chance you take keeping me." Before he could answer, the crack of a rifle split the air. A plume of dust leapt from the earth beside them. Silas kicked the horse forward, heart hammering. Another shot rang out, closer this time. The ravine twisted sharply, offering cover. Silas pulled the horse to a stop, sliding from the saddle and dragging Kiona with him. They pressed against the rocky wall, breaths ragged. "Stay low," he ordered, checking the chamber of his rifle. Kiona crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the ridge with uncanny precision. She raised her hand, pointing toward a cluster of boulders. There, two men. Silas followed her gesture, squinting. Sure enough, a pair of shapes shifted behind the rocks. His chest tightened. She'd seen them faster than he had. Good eyes, he muttered. Her voice was calm but laced with bitterness. My people learned early. If you don't see first, you don't live. The words stung more than he expected. He took aim, waiting for a clear shot. But before he could fire, a voice echoed down from the ridge. Cowboy, rough mocking. Leave the girl and ride on. She ain't yours to keep. Silas's grip on the rifle tightened. He shouted back, she's not yours either. Laughter drifted down, cruel and sharp. She's ours by right. You think you can change an Apache's fate with bullets? Kiona's jaw clenched, her hands curling into fists. Silas glanced at her, but she refused to meet his eyes. The words clearly weren't meant for him. They were meant for her, a reminder of the chains she'd been dragged in. Another shot cracked, ricocheting off the stone above their heads. Dust rained down. Silas pulled her closer against the wall. His mind raced. 3, maybe 4 men on the ridge, outnumbered, pinned down. The horse snorted nervously, tugging at the reins. If they bolted now, they'd be cut down before they cleared the ravine. But if they stayed, they'd be boxed in until the men decided to come down and finish it. Kiona's voice broke through his thoughts, quiet but urgent. There is another way. He looked at her sharply. What way? She pointed down the ravine where a narrow slit in the rock cut toward deeper shadow. A path. My people used it to escape when soldiers came. They won't know it. Silas hesitated. It looked barely wide enough for a man to slip through, let alone a horse. But Kiona's certainty shook him. Are you sure? He pressed. Her eyes met his for the first time since the shots began. Do you trust me? The question hung heavy in the hot air, louder than the gunfire. Silas's throat tightened. Trust wasn't something he'd given easily. Not to men, not to women, not to strangers. Yet here he was, cornered with nothing but her word to stand on. Another shot rang out closer still. The men were moving down. Silas cursed under his breath, made his choice, and grabbed the reins. Stay close, he told her, guiding the horse toward the dark slit in the rock. As they slipped into the narrow passage, the echoes of the men's laughter followed, bouncing off the canyon walls. But the sound that froze Silas's blood came not from the ridge. It came from ahead, deeper in the shadows where Kiona's path led, a sound low and metallic. The rattle of spurs on stone. The narrow slit in the canyon pressed them close, the walls jagged and damp with the cool shadow that never saw the sun. Silas led the horse carefully, one hand on the reins, the other gripping his rifle. Behind him, Kiona moved with surprising confidence, her steps sure on the uneven stone. But then came the sound again. Metal striking rock, slow and deliberate. Spurs. Silas froze. His eyes darted ahead, narrowing against the dim light. A silhouette shifted at the end of the passage, blocking the way. The man stepped forward, tall and broad, his hat pulled low, a rifle slung casual across his chest. The glint of iron at his boots confirmed what Silas had heard. The stranger leaned one shoulder against the rock wall, as if he'd been waiting. Well, well, the man drawled, voice echoing in the narrow pass. Thought I heard a rat in the cracks. Didn't reckon it'd be you, Garrett. Silas stiffened. Boone. A slow grin spread across the man's face. His teeth were yellow, his eyes hard as flint. Didn't think you were fool enough to ride back through Apache land, and with company no less. His gaze slid to Kiona, lingering like a knife point. Pretty company. Silas's grip on the rifle tightened. Step aside, Boone. Boone chuckled low, shaking his head. You know I can't do that. Boys up top are eager. They'll be coming down soon enough. But me, I like to take first pick. Kiona's jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Her silence was sharp as any blade, but Silas could feel the tension radiating off her. Silas raised the rifle. One more word and you're done. Boone didn't flinch. He leaned forward, spitting into the dust between them. You don't scare me, Garrett. You never did. You've been riding alone too long, making yourself believe you're some kind of savior. Truth is, you're just as broken as the rest of us. The words cut deeper than Silas expected. Old history stirred. The nights he and Boone had once ridden together, hunting bounties across the border before Boone's taste for cruelty had driven Silas to walk away. Now here he was again, standing between Silas and the girl, a shadow of the past, refusing to let him go. The horse shifted nervously, hooves scraping against the stone. Silas took a step forward, rifle still leveled. "You'll move, Boone, or you'll bleed here." Boone smirked, lifting his own weapon, slow as a snake uncoiling. "Then let's see who bleeds first." The standoff stretched heavy as the desert heat. Silas's finger curled on the trigger. Then Keona's voice broke the silence. Calm, low, unshaken. "He won't shoot you." Both men glanced at her. Her eyes burned steady in the dim light. "He wants you alive. He wants you afraid." Boone sneered. "And what would you know of it, girl?" She stepped closer, the firelight gone from her skin, but something fiercer in her stance. "I know men who kill fast and men who savor the pain. You're the second, which means you wait too long." Silas didn't waste the opening. In one motion, he shifted his rifle and fired. The shot rang out deafening in the narrow pass. Boone's hat spun off his head as the bullet grazed the rock inches from his face, showering him with shards of stone. Boone stumbled back, cursing, his grin twisted into a snarl. Silas shoved Keona behind him, pulling her toward the horse. "Move." They bolted deeper into the passage, the walls pressing tighter. Behind them, Boone's voice echoed furious and raw. "You can run Garrett, but you can't hide her forever." The words chased them through the canyon, bouncing from stone to stone. Silas's gut nodded. Boone wasn't bluffing. The men on the ridge were closing in, and now Boone had blood in his eyes. The passage spat them out into a wider gulch, the light stabbing their eyes after the dim shadows. Silas yanked the horse forward, scanning the ridges. For the moment, it looked empty. They stopped only long enough for Silas to reload, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Keona stood close, her breath quick, but her expression steady. "You knew him," she said. Silas nodded grimly. "Once, long ago." Her gaze didn't waver. "And now he's worse than any beast we faced last night." Keona studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Beasts hunt for hunger. Men like him hunt for shame." Silas didn't answer. Her words were too true. He turned, scanning the horizon again. They needed distance, but Boone would follow, and with the others closing in, it was only a matter of time before they were trapped again. The horse stamped the ground, restless. Silas swung into the saddle, pulling Keona up behind him. He spurred the animal forward, dust flying in their wake. But even as they rode, Silas couldn't shake the echo of Boone's words, nor the knowledge that the man wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted. And then, as the sun dipped low once more, Silas saw it. Smoke curling in the distance, rising from where his ranch should have stood. The closer they rode, the thicker the smoke grew, heavy with the acrid stench of burned wood and scorched earth. Silas's gut twisted with every stride of the horse. 3 days ago, he'd left his ranch to track rumors. He'd expected to return to nothing more than dust and silence, the way he always did. Now the black column rising into the sky told a different story. Keona clung to him, silent but alert. Her head tilted slightly, listening her breath, even despite the urgency. Silas envied her composure. His own chest felt like it might split apart. When they crested the last ridge, the sight below froze him. The cabin's roof had collapsed inward, charred beams jutting upward like broken ribs. The corral fence lay scattered, and the mule that had once plodded lazily inside was nowhere to be seen. The yard was littered with footprints, heavy boots pressed deep in the ash, circling like wolves around prey. Silas reined in hard, staring. His throat was dry rage simmering just beneath his ribs. "They torched it," he muttered, voice low. Keona slid down from the saddle, crouching near the tracks. She brushed her fingers lightly across the soot, following the patterns with uncanny precision. 4 men, maybe 5. They left quickly, but they searched first. Silas swung down, jaw clenched. "Searching for what?" Her eyes met his, sharp and unflinching. "For me." The words landed heavy. He knew she was right. Boone hadn't been chasing Silas out of old grudges. He'd been chasing her. Whatever history she carried, it was enough to bring men willing to burn and kill. Silas kicked at a charred beam, sending sparks scattering. "This place was all I had left." His voice cracked before he caught himself, hardening again. "Damn them." Keona stood, the firelight from the ruins painting her face in shades of bronze and ash. "A home can be rebuilt, but you cannot if you let rage blind you." Her calmness infuriated him for a moment, but then he saw her wrists again, still raw, wrapped in his torn cloth, and the weight of her words settled. She had lost more than he ever had, yet she stood steady. He turned sharply, scanning the horizon. "We can't stay. They'll come back to see if I returned." The horse stamped nervously, ears flicking. Kiona bent, pressing her palm against the earth. "They're near," she whispered. "The ground still shakes from their steps." Silas felt the back of his neck prickle. He dropped into a crouch beside her, listening. At first he heard nothing. Then, faint but growing clearer, the distant clatter of hooves carried on the dry wind. "They're circling back," he said, teeth gritted. Kiona's eyes darted to the canyon behind them where the smoke drifted thick. "If we ride now, they'll see us against the sky moon," Silas cursed under his breath. The open desert offered no cover. Running meant death. They needed another plan. He led the horse toward the collapsed barn, tugging Kiona behind him. The walls still stood, in part blackened, but strong enough to hide them from a distance. He pulled her into the shadows, crouching low as the hoofbeats grew louder. Minutes dragged. Then came the voices, rough mocking, carried clear in the still air. "Burned it good, didn't we?" one man jeered. "Bet Garrett comes back sniffing like a dog to his pen." Another voice, deeper, colder. "He'll come. He always does. And when he does, the girl will be with him." Kiona's shoulders stiffened, but she stayed silent. Silas's hand hovered over his rifle, his knuckles white. Every instinct screamed to rush out to gun them down where they stood, but he forced himself to stay still. Outnumbered, exposed. They'd be dead in seconds. From their hiding place, they watched three riders appear, silhouettes against the burning remains. The man in front dismounted slowly, surveying the wreckage with satisfaction. He wore a long coat, dark as midnight, his hat pulled low. Cormac Thorne. "Search the rubble," he ordered. "He's stubborn. He might have left something worth taking." The other two dismounted, kicking through the ashes. One laughed when he found a cracked tin cup, tossing it aside. The other pulled up the charred remains of a chair, snapping it in half. Silas's chest burned. Every broken piece felt like a wound in his own flesh. He bit the inside of his cheek until he tasted blood, forcing himself not to move. Beside him, Kiona leaned close, her whisper barely audible. "Patience. Fire burns fast, but smoke hides longer. Wait." Her words calmed him just enough to hold still. Cormac paced the yard. The man paused, squinting toward the barn. For a heartbeat, Silas thought he had been spotted. Cormac's gaze lingered, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver. Then he turned away, spitting into the dirt. "Nothing here. He'll come to us. He's got nowhere else to run." They mounted up again, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. Silas exhaled slowly, muscles trembling with the restraint. He turned to Kiona, whispering harshly, "They'll hunt us until one of us is dead. You know that, don't you?" Her eyes held his without flinching. "Then you must decide. Are you running for yourself or for me?" The question struck deeper than any bullet. For a long moment, Silas had no answer. And then outside in the yard, a sudden crack split the air. Not a gunshot, but the snap of a branch under weight. Silas raised his rifle instantly, eyes darting toward the tree line. Someone else was here. The crack of the branch echoed too sharp to be wind. Silas held his rifle steady, breath locked in his chest. Kiona froze, her dark eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the smoldering ruins. The horse tossed its head, nostrils flaring, sensing the tension. For a moment, silence pressed heavy. Then slowly a figure emerged from the shadows, hands raised, palms open. "Easy, Garrett," the man called. His voice carried the rasp of long miles and dry whiskey. "Ain't here to shoot you." Silas's jaw tightened. He knew that voice. It belonged to Boone Ketchum, the same man who had blocked their path in his canyon. But something was different now. The mocking edge was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like caution. "Drop the rifle, Boone," Silas barked, "or I'll make sure you don't finish that sentence." Boone gave a dry chuckle, lowering his rifle and setting it carefully on the ground. He stepped forward, face weathered, beard ragged. "Word was Cormac's boys been sniffing after you. Figured I'd see if the stories were true." His eyes flicked to Kiona, lingering with a curiosity Silas didn't like. "And I reckon they are." Silas's stance didn't ease. "If you're riding with Cormac, walk away now." Boone shook his head, spitting into the dirt. "Ain't riding with nobody, not anymore. Cormac's gone meaner than a rattler. I got no taste for that." He squatted near the ashes, poking at a charred beam with his boot. Guessing he was looking for her. Kiona didn't move, her expression unreadable, but Silas felt her tense at his side, as though the weight of Boone's words were another set of ropes binding her. "What do you know?" Silas demanded. Boone's eyes narrowed, studying the girl. She ain't just some stray. Cormac don't burn down houses for scraps. He burns them for bounties. He paused, measuring his words. Heard tell of a price on an Apache girl. Sharp, some say, but sharper than any hunter. Word is she's carrying something that'll hang half the territory. Silas's stomach dropped. He turned to Kiona, but she wouldn't meet his gaze. Boone grinned faintly. Didn't figure you for the type to play hero, Garrett. Not after what happened in Abilene. Silas's blood ran hot. That was years ago. You keep your mouth shut. But Kiona spoke then, her voice calm but edged with iron. What happened in Abilene? The question cut clean. Silas opened his mouth, but no words came. The fire popped behind them, filling the silence. He couldn't. Boone chuckled again, shaking his head. Man's past always catches up. Yours just caught up with a torch. He rose slowly, brushing ash from his hands. But I ain't here to trade ghosts. I came to warn you. Cormac's boys are riding south, blocking the path to Silver Rock. You try to head that way, you'll die. Silas frowned. And why the hell should I believe you? Boone met his eyes, the grin gone now. Because Cormac's worse than you remember. And he don't just want her. He wants to break you. He paused, letting the words sink in. You kill me here, fine. But then you'll have no one who knows the trails he's laying. Silas hesitated. The man was a snake, slippery and dangerous. But sometimes snakes were the only ones who knew the ground ahead. Kiona stepped forward, her voice steady. Men who change sides are not to be trusted. Boone tilted his head, smirking at her. Sharp tongue for one who don't speak much. You're right not to trust me, girl. But you'll want to hear what I know. Silas studied Boone's face, searching for the lie. Years of riding together had taught him to read the man's tells. The way Boone's left eye twitched when he lied. The way his hands stayed too still when he planned violence. Neither tell showed now. Why now? Silas asked quietly. Why help me after all these years? Boone's grin faded completely. He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a brand burned into his forearm. A crude T for Thorn. Cormac don't just hire men, he owns them. I tried to leave once 3 years back. He caught me. Did this. He looked away, jaw tight. I've been his dog for 5 years, Garrett. Sick of the leash. Sick of the killings. Sick of watching him burn villages just to send a message. Silas saw it then. Not cunning, but desperation. A man who'd lost himself somewhere along the trail and didn't know how to get back. One wrong move, Boone, Silas said finally. One. I know. Silas weighed the rifle in his hands, every instinct torn. The thought of riding blind into Cormac's trap made his skin crawl, but trusting Boone Ketchum was a gamble that could cost them both their lives. Finally, Silas lowered the rifle slightly, though his eyes stayed hard. Talk, but one false step and I'll finish what I should have in Abilene. Boone nodded, spreading his hands. Fair enough. Cormac's planning to cut you off at the canyon fork. He'll drive you east toward where the land's dry and the waterholes are gone. Starve you out, break your will. He's patient like that. Silas's stomach clenched. It sounded just like Cormac. Slow cruelty instead of quick death. And what do you get out of this? Silas pressed. Boone's voice dropped lower. Same thing I always get. Survival. Cormac don't forgive debts, and I owe him plenty. If I help you burn him down, maybe I can walk free. The words hung between them, thick with risk. Kiona studied Boone's face, her eyes narrowing. Then she spoke softly to Silas. A man who fears another man more than death will betray you when fear returns. Her warning cut deep, but Silas's options were thin. He holstered the rifle, though his hand stayed close. We move west. Cormac won't expect it. You're riding with us, Boone. But one false step and I'll put you in the ground myself. Boone gave a low whistle, retrieving his rifle from the dirt. Fair deal, Garrett, fair deal. As they mounted up, Kiona's hand tightened briefly on Silas's arm. She didn't speak, but her eyes told him enough. She did not trust Boone, and she didn't want Silas to either. They rode out into the fading light, 3 shadows against the ash-stained horizon. For the moment, they shared a path. But as the first stars pricked the sky, Silas caught Boone watching Kiona too long, his expression unreadable. And Silas knew this uneasy alliance would not hold forever. The desert stretched endless beneath the fading light, each mile swallowing the hooves of their horses in silence. Silas rode ahead, shoulders tight, scanning the ridges as if Cormac's shadow lurked behind every stone. Kiona sat close behind him, her eyes steady on the horizon. Boone trailed just behind his grin, on his face a mask of weariness or calculation. Silas couldn't tell which. The air grew colder as night approached. The wind carried whispers through the sage, a sound that made Silas's skin prickle. He slowed the horse near a cluster of rocks, motioning for the others to stop. "We'll rest here till moonrise," he said. His voice was flat, commanding. Boone dismounted with a groan, stretching his back. "Can't argue with that. Horse will drop dead if we push harder." Silas ignored him, focusing on Kiona. "Stay close to the fire when I light it. No wandering." She bristled faintly. "I am not a child." His jaw tightened, but he only nodded. "All the same tonight, the dark ain't safe." As Silas gathered wood, Boone crouched beside Kiona. His tone was casual, almost friendly. "You know he can't keep you safe forever, girl. Garrett's tough, sure, but Cormac's got men stacked higher than his pride." Kiona's gaze cut to him, sharp as flint. "Better a man who stands alone than one who bows to many." Boone chuckled low, shaking his head. Sharp tongue again. "Careful, or you'll make me think you're the one running this little escape." Silas returned before she could answer, dropping the wood between them. His eyes locked on Boone. "You keep your words short around her." The fire sparked to life, its glow pushing back the creeping dark. They ate in silence, jerky and dry bread, each lost in thought. Silas's ears strained at every sound. The crack of branches, the whisper of wind, the cry of a distant coyote. But beneath it all, another unease gnawed at him. Boone's presence. When the meal ended, Kiona lay near the flames blanket pulled around her shoulders. Silas sat watch rifle across his lap. Boone leaned against a rock hat low over his eyes, though Silas doubted he slept. Hours passed. The moon climbed high silver light, cutting sharp shadows across the land. Silas's eyelids grew heavy, but he forced them open, fighting the weight of exhaustion. The night pressed on silent, except for the crackle of burning wood. Silas found his mind drifting, as it always did in the quiet hours, back to Abilene. 5 years. 5 years since the night that had hollowed him out. He and Boone had been tracking a man named Blackjack Murphy, a killer who'd robbed a payroll wagon and left 3 guards dead. They'd chased him for 2 weeks across Texas, finally cornering him in Abilene at an old grain warehouse. Murphy had barricaded himself inside. Silas remembered the way the door had splintered when they kicked it, in the smell of kerosene heavy in the air. And then the screaming. Murphy hadn't been alone. He'd taken a family hostage inside. A mother, a father, 2 children. He'd poured kerosene across the floor, threatened to light it if they came closer. Boone had wanted to rush in anyway. "He's bluffing," he'd said, but Silas had hesitated. 10 seconds, maybe less. He'd stood there, rifle raised, watching the match in Murphy's hand, frozen by the fear of making the wrong choice. Murphy lit the match. The warehouse erupted. Boone had rushed in, then dragging out the youngest child, a boy of maybe 6. But the others, the mother, father, the daughter, their screams had echoed until the smoke swallowed them. Silas had pulled Boone from the flames when the roof started to collapse. The boy survived. Boone's hands were scarred for life, his back burned. But 3 people died because Silas froze. He'd walked away from bounty hunting the next day. Boone had stayed, grown harder, meaner. They'd never spoken of it again. Until now. Silas blinked, pulling himself from the memory. Kiona was watching him from across the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You carry weight," she said softly. "I see it in how you move." Silas didn't answer. "The man you were," she continued, "he is not the man you are." "Wow. How would you know?" The words came out rougher than he intended. "Because the man you were would have left me to the wolves." The truth of it settled over him like a blanket. She was right. 5 years ago, he might have ridden past that post, told himself it wasn't his fight. But something had changed. Before he could respond, movement caught his eye. Boone was awake, slipping something into his saddlebag. The motion was quick, furtive. Silas's hand moved to his rifle. Boone noticed, froze. "Just checking my ammunition," Boone said casually. Too casually. Silas said nothing, but his eyes stayed locked on the man. The rest of the night passed in uneasy silence. Dawn crept slow across the desert, bleeding light into the hollow where they had camped. The ground was cold and damp, their blankets thin, the silence broken only by the distant cry of hawks circling overhead. Silas rose first, stiff from a night of half-sleep, his rifle never far from reach. He scanned the horizon, every shadow a threat. Boone stirred next, grumbling, stretching his back with exaggerated groans. Hell of a bed you found us, Garrett. Rocks in places a man shouldn't have rocks. Silas ignored him, focusing instead on Quiona. She sat cross-legged near the brush, eyes closed, her face tilted toward the morning sun. Her stillness unnerved him. She looked almost at peace, though Silas could sense the storm beneath. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. You should leave me. Silas turned sharply. Not a chance. Her eyes opened, dark and unwavering. Cormac hunts me, not you. With me gone, you live. Silas shook his head. Doesn't work that way. Men like Cormac don't stop once they've started. He'll hunt me whether you're here or not. Boone chuckled low, spitting into the dirt. Girl's got a point, Garrett. Hand her over. You walk free. Cormac gets what he wants, and maybe he lets you keep breathing. Silas rounded on him, rifle raised. You say that again, catch him, and I'll make sure you stop breathing. Boone raised both hands, smirk thin. Easy, just speaking what's true. But Quiona's gaze stayed on Silas. He is right about one thing. There is a bounty. My father gave me up, sold me to men like Cormac, when debt chained him tighter than rope. She looked away, her voice tightening. But I am worth more than coin. Not because of who I am, but because of what I carry. Silas's chest tightened. What do you mean? She reached into the fold of her dress, pulling free a small pouch of worn leather tied with sinew. She held it between them, her fingers trembling slightly. This. Silas frowned. What is it? Her eyes dropped to the pouch. It is the only thing my mother left me. Inside is proof, names, markings, trade records. Deals made between ranchers and soldiers selling Apache land for gold. She paused, her voice hardening. Cormac works for those men. That is why he hunts me. Silas's stomach dropped. The game was bigger than he had thought. Cormac wasn't chasing vengeance or simple cruelty. He was working for men who feared exposure. Men who would burn a dozen ranches to keep their secrets buried. Boone whistled low. Well, ain't that something? No wonder they want you, girl. You're a walking gallows rope for half the territory. Quiona closed her fist around the pouch. It is not for revenge. It is for truth. My people deserve to know why their homes burn, why their children starve. Without this, they are told lies. With it, they can fight. Silas felt the weight of her words press heavy on him. He thought of his own ranch, now ashes on the wind, and realized he wasn't just a bystander anymore. You should have told me, he said, her voice cut sharp. Would you have stayed knowing Cormac would never stop? Or would you have walked away like every other man? The words pierced him. Silas had walked away before. From Abilene, from responsibility, from the burden of other people's lives. I'm here, he said finally, and I'll see this through. Boone snorted, shaking his head. You're both mad. You think you can drag a pouch of names across the desert and topple men who got lawmen in their pockets? Hell, Garrett, you ain't just signing your death, you're signing mine too. Silas's eyes hardened. Nobody asked you to stay. For once, Boone didn't grin. His eyes flicked to Quiona, then back to Silas. Cormac won't quit, not till she's in his hands. And if that pouch is what you say it is, there's more than Cormac after. You'll be hunted by ranchers, soldiers, maybe even judges. You're sitting on a fire that'll burn the whole territory. Quiona's face didn't waver. Then let it burn. Truth burns, but lies rot. The conviction in her voice silenced them both. Silas stared at her, seeing not just the girl tied to a post days before, but a woman carrying the weight of an entire people. He felt a shift deep inside. This wasn't about rescue anymore. It was about choosing sides in a war already raging. The wind shifted, carrying faint echoes of hoofbeats. Silas stiffened, listening. Quiona tilted her head, her voice low. They are closer than before. Silas grabbed the rifle, motioning to the others. We move now. If Cormac wants this fight, we give it to him on ground we choose. They mounted quickly, the horse uneasy beneath the weight of three. The horizon stretched wide, unforgiving. Silas spurred forward, Quiona's words echoing in his mind. Truth burns, but lies rot. And as the dust rose behind them, he knew Cormac was not far. But he also knew the real fire was no longer in Cormac's torch. It was in the leather pouch clenched tight in Quiona's hands. The sun burned high, washing the land in blinding white. Silas urged the horse harder, every muscle taut with urgency. Kiona clutched the saddle horn, the leather pouch still hidden in her fist. Boone rode alongside, sweat dripping from his brow, eyes darting nervously across the horizon. They had ridden for hours, but the hoofbeats behind them never faded. Dust plumes rose in the distance, Cormac's men relentless closing the gap. Silas pulled the horse into a shallow arroyo, the walls high enough to give cover. He dismounted quickly, tying the reins tight. "We can't outrun them anymore," he said, voice rough. "We make our stand here." Boone shook his head violently. "You're out of your damn mind. There's at least 6 riders back there, maybe more. You think 3 of us, one half-dead horse, can hold them off?" Silas's eyes narrowed. "I don't think. I know we got no other choice." Kiona slipped down from the saddle, her steps light, steady. She stood beside Silas, her face calm, though her eyes burned with something fiercer than fear. "If they want me, then let them come. I will not be tied again." Silas studied her, frail from days without rest, wrists still scarred but unbroken. She had the heart of steel he'd only seen in men hardened by war. Boone spat into the dust. "Then it's suicide. And I didn't sign up for suicide." Silas turned sharply, his voice low and lethal. "You signed up when you followed us. You stay, you fight. You run, and you'll die slower when Cormac finds you." Boone swallowed, his bravado faltering. He muttered curses under his breath, but began checking his revolver all the same. They worked quickly, dragging brush and loose stone to the mouth of the arroyo, forming a crude barricade. Silas positioned himself with the rifle. Boone crouched behind a boulder with pistols ready. Kiona knelt at Silas's side, eyes closed, listening to the approach. "They are close," she whispered. 6 riders, one heavier than the rest. Silas's gut tightened. Cormac. Minutes later, the thunder of hooves shook the ground. Shadows flickered on the ridge above, then descended. 6 men, dust rising like storm clouds around them. Cormac led, his coat long and black, his grin wide beneath the brim of his hat. He reined in just beyond rifle range, scanning the arroyo with slow satisfaction. "Garrett," he called, his voice carrying clear, "knew you couldn't run forever." Silas's rifle was steady, aimed at Cormac's chest. "Should have left it at Ash's, Cormac." Cormac laughed deep and cruel. "And missed the fun." No, you got something I want. Hand her over. Maybe I let you crawl out of this alive." Kiona rose, stepping into view beside Silas. The sight of her made Cormac's grin sharpen. "There she is, little bird with fire in her hands. Come now, girl. No need to bleed for a man who don't know what you're worth." Her voice rang out steady as stone. "I know my worth, and it is more than the coin of traitors." Cormac's grin faltered, his eyes narrowed. "She's got your tongue, Garrett. Careful or she'll hang you with it." He raised his hand, signaling his men. "Take them alive." The riders spurred forward, guns drawn. Silas fired first, the crack echoing through the arroyo. One rider dropped, tumbling hard into the dust. Boone's pistols barked wild but fast, driving another back. The rest closed in bullets, sparking off stone, the air thick with dust and smoke. "Down!" Silas shouted, pulling Kiona behind the barricade. She ducked, clutching the pouch tight, her breath fast but her gaze unbroken. Cormac dismounted, striding forward through the chaos, revolver steady in his hand. His presence alone seemed to bend the fight, his men rallying behind his shadow. He fired twice, bullets biting into the stone inches from Silas's head. Silas reloaded, jaw tight. Boone cursed loudly, fumbling with his last rounds. "We can't hold them, Garrett. They'll bleed us dry." But before Silas could answer, Kiona rose from cover. She held the pouch high, her voice ringing out over the gunfire. "This is what you want." Everything stopped. Even Cormac froze, his grin twisting into something darker. Kiona's eyes burned. "You burned homes. You broke families. And still you fear these papers more than any bullet." Cormac's expression curdled, rage flashing. "You think that scrap will save you? You don't even know the fire you're playing with, girl." His men hesitated, eyes darting between Cormac and the pouch. Doubt flickered in their faces, the kind that cracks loyalty. Silas's heart pounded. She had just shifted the ground beneath them. Cormac stepped forward, gun leveled at Kiona. "Give it to me, or I swear." The rest of his threat was drowned by a sudden shot. Loud, close, unexpected. One of Cormac's own men staggered, blood spreading across his chest, his pistol still smoking. The man had fired not at Silas, not at Kiona, but at another of Cormac's riders. And just like that, the line of loyalty shattered. The gunshots still echoed off the canyon walls when the first rider hit the ground, dust rising around his body. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. Another of Cormac's men spun shouting, "You bastard!" and fired at the traitor who had just dropped his companion. The shot missed ricocheting off stone, but it was enough to break the fragile thread of obedience holding them together. Two riders turned their guns on each other. Years of buried grudges spilling out in an instant. Bullets cracked in the arroyo, men cursing, horses screaming as they reared and scattered, the air filled with smoke and confusion. Silas seized the moment. "No," he barked, shoving Kiona behind the Bear guy. He rose rifle steady and fired into the fray. One rider tumbled from the saddle, crashing into the dirt. Boone, wild-eyed, emptied both pistols, shouting curses that vanished in the roar of gunfire. Cormac didn't flinch. He strode through the storm like a man carved from stone, his revolver spitting fire with every step. He dropped one of his own men without hesitation, the man who had hesitated too long to follow orders. His voice boomed over the chaos. "You think you can break me with paper and whispers. You think I don't own the law itself." Kiona's voice rang out clear even through the din. "Lies own you, Cormac. Truth will burn you." Her defiance cut through him, if only for a flicker. His eyes blazed as he locked onto her, raising his revolver. Silas fired first, the bullet grazing Cormac's shoulder. Cormac staggered, teeth bared in pain and rage. He turned his gun on Silas, their eyes locking across the smoke. "Still playing hero, Garrett," Cormac growled. "You ain't got the stomach to finish what you start." Silas's jaw clenched. "You'll find out soon enough." Another shot cracked, Boone firing wild. The bullet struck Cormac's hat, spinning it from his head. Cormac wheeled on Boone, fury twisting his face. "I should have gutted you in Abilene," he roared. Boone froze, the memory of whatever ghost bound them flashing across his eyes. For a moment, Silas thought Cormac would kill him outright. But the fight around them surged, pulling Cormac's attention back as one of his men shouted, "We're outnumbered." It was true. Half of Cormac's riders now lay in the dust, cut down by bullets or their own infighting. The others pulled back, uncertain, casting nervous glances at Cormac as though waiting for him to fall. Cormac stood, bleeding, coat-torn eyes burning with venom. He raised his revolver again, but this time his voice was calm, deadly calm. "This ain't over, Garrett. I'll drag you both to hell before I quit." He fired once more, the bullet tearing splinters from the barricade inches from Kiona's face. She didn't flinch. Instead, she held the pouch high again, her voice fierce. "Kill me, and the truth lives with him." She pointed at Silas. "Kill him, and it lives with me." The men hesitated, their resolve splintering further. One rider cursed, throwing down his gun and spurring his horse away. Another followed. The rest shifted uneasily, unwilling to die for Cormac's madness. Cormac roared, firing into the sky in blind fury. "Cowards! You'll crawl back to me on your bellies before this is done." But his words rang hollow now. He was bleeding, outnumbered, his men scattering. Still, his eyes locked on Kiona with a predator's hunger. "The girl comes with me, Grim, one way or another." Silas stepped out from cover, rifle steady despite the ache in his arms. "Not today." For the first time, Cormac faltered. The confidence that had carried him through every cruelty wavered as the barrel of Silas's rifle bore down on him. He spat into the dust, backing toward his horse. "This ain't finished," he hissed. "You think paper and pride make you strong? I'll show you strength. I'll tear the world down till there's nowhere left to run." He mounted, blood dripping from his sleeve, and spurred his horse hard, vanishing into the haze of dust. The arroyo fell silent except for the labored breathing of those who remained. Boone lowered his pistols with a shaky laugh. "Well, wasn't that a fine dance?" Silas ignored him, rushing to Kiona. "You hurt?" She shook her head, though her chest rose fast. "Not hurt, but this ends only when Cormac ends." Silas nodded grimly. He knew she was right. The fight was not victory. It was only survival. And survival meant the war was far from done. As the last echoes of hooves faded, Silas looked to the horizon. The sun blazed mercilessly, casting long shadows that promised more blood before nightfall. And deep inside, he knew Cormac would not retreat to lick his wounds. He would return stronger, meaner, and with allies who cared nothing for truth or justice. The pouch in Kiona's hands weighed heavier than iron, and Silas realized they weren't just carrying evidence anymore. They were carrying the spark of a fire that could burn the whole territory to ash. The sun dipped low as they rode west, the sky bleeding red and gold across the horizon. Every hoofbeat echoed like a drum of war. Silas's rifle lay across his lap, but his grip was tighter on the reins than the steel. Kiona rode steady behind him, her hands clutching the pouch that had already cost them too much. Boone followed, hat pulled low, his eyes scanning the trail with restless suspicion. They hadn't spoken since the fight in the arroyo. The silence weighed heavy, each of them wrapped in their own thoughts. Silas's mind replayed Cormac's words. "You'll crawl back to me on your bellies before this is done." He knew Cormac wasn't bluffing. The man would return with fresh riders, maybe with soldiers bought by gold and whiskey. And when he did, there would be no half measures. By dusk, Silas pulled the horse into a dry hollow surrounded by stone. The place offered shelter from the wind, but little else. He swung down, scanning the ridges. "We'll rest here tonight," he said. Boone snorted. "Rest with Cormac breathing down our necks." "You're losing your edge, Garrett." Silas turned, eyes like flint. "You want to keep riding in circles till the horse drops dead. Be my guest. Otherwise, you'll shut up and help gather wood." For once, Boone said nothing. He tossed his reins aside and stomped off, muttering under his breath. Kiona slipped from the saddle, her face calm but drawn. She crouched near the fire Silas lit, watching the flames catch. After a while, she spoke quietly. "He will come again, with more men, with law at his side." Silas didn't look at her. "I know. You cannot fight him alone." "I ain't alone." His voice came sharper than he meant, but her gaze softened, as if she understood more than he could admit. Later, when the fire burned low, Silas took first watch. Boone sprawled against a rock, hat tipped over his eyes. Kiona sat near Silas, the pouch still in her lap. She untied the sinew cord, opening it for the first time since she revealed its secret. Inside were folded papers. Edges yellowed, ink faded but still clear. She spread them carefully in the firelight. Silas leaned closer. "What's it say?" Her finger traced the words, her voice low but steady. "Names of men who sold Apache land for coin. Marks of soldiers who looked away. And Cormac's name written twice." Silas's stomach turned. Proof enough to hang a dozen men in Silver Rock. If only the law weren't already bought by their gold. "You think the courts will touch this?" he asked. Her eyes met his. "Maybe not, but the people will. Once truth is spoken, lies cannot silence it." Her conviction stirred something in him. He'd spent years believing nothing could change, that the world was too cruel to fight. But in her voice he heard something different. Hope sharp as steel. Behind them, Boone stirred, groaning as he sat up. He caught sight of the papers and whistled low. "So that's the treasure, huh? Worth more than silver, less than blood." Silas stiffened. "Keep your distance, Boone." Boone raised his hands. "Relax, Garrett. I ain't after scraps of paper, but Cormac is. And if you think you can march into town with that and not end up hanging beside her, you're a bigger fool than I thought." Kiona's voice cut through him. "The fool who stands is worth more than a coward who kneels." Boone's grin faltered. For the first time, he didn't have a clever answer. The night dragged, the fire crackling low. Silas fought to keep his eyes open, scanning the ridges for movement. But it was Kiona who stilled him with a whisper hours before dawn. Silas woke to Kiona's hand on his shoulder. No words, just her eyes wide urgent. He heard it then. Not footsteps. Voices. Close. Careless. Cormac's men were camped less than 100 yards away, unaware their prey slept just beyond the rocks. "We move now," Silas whispered. Quiet. They gathered their things in silence, every motion slow and deliberate. Boone's hands shook as he saddled his horse, but he made no sound. They led the horses on foot, keeping to the shadows, moving away from the voices. It took an hour to put distance between them and Cormac's camp. When they finally mounted and rode, the eastern sky was beginning to pale. "That was too close," Boone muttered. Kiona said nothing, but Silas saw the way her hands trembled as she gripped his coat. Even her iron resolve had limits. By midday, they spotted Silver Rock in the distance. The town sat nestled in a valley, its buildings small and weathered, the courthouse rising at its center like a crooked tooth. Silas reined in on a ridge overlooking the settlement. "That's it," he said. "That's where we make our stand." Boone shifted in his saddle. You sure about this, Garrett? Walk into that town with her and that pouch you're painting a target on your back. I know. Kiona leaned forward, her voice quiet but firm. If I walk to him, he will spare you. That is the way of men like him. Kill only when their prize resists. Silas turned on her, fury flashing in his eyes. Don't you dare! You think I dragged you this far just to hand you back? Her gaze didn't waver. Sometimes survival means sacrifice. Boone stepped forward, suddenly his voice harsh. She's right, Garrett. Hand her over and maybe we live another day. You know, Cormac wants her, not us. Silas leveled the rifle at him, voice like iron. You shut your mouth, Boone. One more word and you won't live another minute. Boone froze, his eyes flicking between Silas and Kiona. The tension stretched heavy as the sky above them. Silas lowered the rifle slowly, his voice dropping. We ride into Silver Rock together, all three of us. And we don't stop till that pouch is in the hands of someone who can't be bought. He looked at Kiona. You came this far to speak truth, so speak it. Loud enough the whole territory hears. She nodded, her eyes bright. Then let us go. They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent. Silver Rock's main street was quiet when they arrived. A few townspeople stopped to stare. Whispers followed them like dust. That's Garrett. Is that the Apache girl? Wasn't Cormac hunting them? Silas dismounted in front of the courthouse, helping Kiona down. Boone followed, limping slightly from days in the saddle. People gathered, drawn by curiosity and the unmistakable sense that something was about to happen. Kiona walked to the courthouse steps. She turned to face the growing crowd. Her voice rang out clear and strong. I am Kiona, daughter of Najoni. My mother died protecting this truth. I will not let her die for silence. She held the pouch high. These are the names of men who sold land that was not theirs, who burned homes, who killed children, who lied to you while they filled their pockets with gold. The crowd stirred, anger rippling like fire through dry grass. This is their truth, and now it is yours. The people pressed closer, faces hardening. The silence broke into voices. From the courthouse, a figure emerged. An old man, white-haired, his face carved with years of seeing too much. Judge Henry Blackwood, the only man in Silver Rock who hadn't been bought. He stepped forward, his voice steady. I will hear the evidence. Tomorrow at the courthouse. Let the law decide. The crowd murmured, uncertain. Cormac's shadow still loomed even in death. But Silas stood beside Kiona, and the people saw it. A cowboy who'd chosen his side. That night, as Silas kept watch from the hotel window, he knew Cormac's allies would not wait for a trial. They would come for blood. And he was ready. The attack came at 2 in the morning. Silas heard them before he saw them. The creak of boots on wood, the whisper of men trying to move quietly. He woke Kiona and Boone with a touch. They're here. 15 men surrounded the hotel, torches, blazing rifles ready. At their head stood the town's mayor, a fat man named Horace Vance, and the deputy sheriff, a hard-eyed killer named Virgil Creed. Garrett, Vance shouted, send out the girl in the papers. Do it now and you can ride out alive. Silas leaned out the window, rifle aimed. Come take on them. The night erupted. Bullets tore through the windows. Silas fired back, dropping one man from his horse. Boone joined him at the other window, pistols blazing. Kiona crouched low, clutching the pouch, her face calm despite the chaos. The fight raged for 30 minutes. The hotel caught fire. Smoke filled the rooms. We can't stay here, Boone yelled. Silas grabbed Kiona's hand. Out the back, now. They burst through the rear door into the alley. 3 men waited. Silas shot 2. Boone tackled the third, beating him bloody with the butt of his pistol. They ran through Silver Rock's back streets, the town waking to gunfire and flames. Judge Blackwood appeared from a side door, shotgun in hand. This way. He led them to the courthouse, barring the heavy doors behind them. They'll burn this too, Silas said. Let them trotting. These walls are stone. They'll hold till morning. And they did. Dawn broke with the hotel in ruins and half of Vance's men dead or fled. The rest surrendered when federal marshals rode into town, summoned by a telegram Blackwood had sent days before. Cormac Thorne's body was found in the desert, 3 bullet holes in his chest, his eyes eaten by crows. The trial lasted 3 days. Kiona testified. The papers were entered as evidence. 12 men were arrested, including Mayor Vance and Deputy Creed. The courtroom packed beyond capacity, people spilling into the street outside. On the final day, Judge Blackwood read his verdict. The evidence is clear and damning. I hereby order the arrest and trial of all named parties. Furthermore, I petition the federal government to establish a commission to investigate land fraud and return stolen Apache territories. The courtroom erupted in applause. Kiona stepped down from the witness stand, her eyes finding Silas's across the crowd. He nodded. She had done it. The spring grass grew green across the valley where Silas had begun building his new cabin. Not a ranch, not a fortress, just a home. He worked the saw across a beam, sweat dripping despite the cool morning air. A horse approached from the east. Silas set down the saw, hand moving instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall. But it was Boone who rode up, a silver star pinned to his chest. "Sheriff Ketchum," Silas said with a thin smile. "Never thought I'd see the day." Boone dismounted, grinning. "Turns out Silver Rock needed a new lawman. Blackwood convinced me I owed it to the territory." "You keeping it honest?" "Trying. It's harder than killing, I'll tell you that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "She asks about you," Boone said finally. Silas didn't need to ask who. "How is she strong?" "The commission approved the land return, 50,000 acres back to the Apache. She's been traveling, speaking at other reservations. They're calling her a hero." Silas nodded, saying nothing. "You should visit," Boone added. "She'd want to see you." "Maybe." Boone studied him for a long moment, then clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't wait too long, Garrett. Life's short, even for men like us." He rode off, leaving Silas alone with his thoughts. That evening, Silas found the letter in his saddlebag. He'd read it so many times the paper was soft as cloth. "Silas, the commission approved the return of 50,000 acres to my people. Boone has become Silver Rock's sheriff, an honest one for once. Judge Blackwood says history will remember what we did. But I remember you, the man who kept his word when words were all we had. Come visit when you're ready." Silas folded the letter carefully, looked toward the horizon where Silver Rock lay. He saddled his horse. He found her in the valley where her people had built their new settlement. Small adobe homes dotted the hillside. Children played in the stream. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Kiona stood among them, teaching a group of young girls how to weave. She looked up as he approached. Their eyes met across the distance. She set down her work and walked to meet him. "You came," she said simply. "A man's word is his bond." She smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her truly smile. "Will you stay for a while?" And then, "I don't know. I'm still figuring out who I am after Abilene." She reached out, took his hand. "Then figure it out here. My people could use a man who keeps his word." Silas looked around the valley, at the children, the homes, the hope rebuilding itself from ash. He thought of the 10 seconds he'd frozen in Abilene, the 3 people who'd died. He thought of Kiona tied to that post, refusing to scream. "Maybe I will," he said. And for the first time in 5 years, Silas Garrett felt the weight begin to lift. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. A year later, Silas still lived in the valley. He built homes, taught the young men to hunt, helped settle disputes. Kiona traveled often, speaking truth to power in courtrooms and Congress halls. But she always came back. And Silas was always there waiting. They never married. She said her people didn't need to see her bound to a white man, even one who'd saved her life. But they built a life together nonetheless. Quiet, honest, rooted in something deeper than law or custom. On winter nights, they would sit by the fire and she would tell him stories of her mother, of the old ways of the battles still to come. And he would listen, this man who had once frozen in fear, now anchored by the voice of a woman who refused to be silent. Years passed. The Apache Land Commission became permanent. More territories were returned. More truth was spoken. Boone served as sheriff for 12 years before retiring, his hands too scarred from old burns to hold a gun steady anymore. Judge Blackwood died at 83 in his sleep with Kiona at his bedside. And Silas Garrett, the cowboy who'd saved one girl and found his own salvation, lived to see the 20th century dawn. On his deathbed, surrounded by the children of the valley who'd grown up calling him Uncle, Kiona held his hand. "Did I do right?" he whispered. After Abilene, she leaned close, her voice strong despite her tears. "You gave your word. You kept it. That is all any man can do." He smiled. "You're sleeping with me now," he said, echoing the words he'd spoken so long ago in the desert. "I always was," she replied. And Silas Garrett closed his eyes for the last time. The weight finally completely lifted.